Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I'm going to explain the parabolic relationship of life in general. There's a lot of new movements that are out there, especially like the law of attraction, whoever created it. These movements are in part created to grab the attention of a lot of individuals because nowadays we are exposed to the extremes at higher frequency than ever before. There has always existed dipole, the yin, the yang of reality. But now the dipole is being spread further apart and over across many domains of existence. For instance, the political regime or the political spectrum is spreading further apart. The distinction between the rich and the poor is spreading further apart to an extent. And we have this spectrum that creates a dipole, and there's a parabolic and negative parabolic relationship that is not symmetric. The neutral axis is skewed in one direction or the other, depending on the tendency of society to shift in a certain direction. For instance, with the advent of social media, we are noticing that the majority of the population engages in such activity over a certain range because it is an inevitable consequence of our reward system. We naturally seek reward or novelty, something that is new, something that feeds the system itself. But the problem is we adapt to the feedback over time. So what this means is the value becomes depreciated as we are exposed repetitively to an equivalent level of stimuli. So what this does is it propagates us to move or progress in life in a positive direction. We are always seeking to move forward. You notice this pattern across anywhere. It is a natural tendency for society to move in that direction. It is a natural tendency to improve. It is a natural tendency to try to resist the negative. The reason the negative exists is to understand the positive. If everything was static, we wouldn't have a distinction. There wouldn't be a contrast. And therefore, because there is a contrast, we are exposed to a plethora of reward and opportunities and possibilities that exist. But life is inherently parabolic and asymmetric. It's not going to be evenly distributed. For instance, like a lot of people nowadays want to use IQ tests to associate intelligence or to categorize it, or we tend to put value on certain things. An IQ, level is just some arbitrary value that could exist within a range, and it does not even indicate intelligence as a whole. It's just a subset of intelligence, but we often utilize this construct to build these correlations and so forth. And in my view, none of that even matters. You see, because whatever position you exist at this moment in time is a function of your lineage. Your previous lineage, they could have been alcoholics, and unfortunately, due to this, there were a lot of the potential or genetic potential has shifted in a negative direction. But that current position, even though it's not desirable, can always be thrust in the positive direction. There's always a rate of change. It may not be extreme. I mean, everyone has to pick a niche and a niche to gravitate towards, which is a function of depending on strengths and so forth. And that's where we get our feedback. But it's not like when you climb a mountain, it has to be, the inclination angle doesn't have to be so steep, as long as it's progressing. And that's the point. Because the trajectory could be changed. But if the thing is if you let these values defeat you, if you're like, oh, because of this fact, I'm defined as such, it's pointless, because then it kind of creates stagnation. And life inevitably and inherently is not fair. It's just a part of the parabolic nature. But that parabolic relationship is dependent on a different domain. It can shift and skew in the positive or negative direction depending on which position, which environment, which niche you reside in, and so forth. That's why the distribution is so different. What I've noticed is and it's interesting because what we notice is at the extreme ends, it becomes more precise. Like, for instance, with attraction, everyone views attraction differently and subjectively, but if you go towards the extremes, it becomes more precise in value. Now, when you get towards the average or neutral axis or relatively average zone, there's a lot of disparity. You notice that's where there's differentiation. There's a lot of skew in one direction or the other. You get a lot of subjectivity. You get a lot of deviance based on different subjects or observers. And so the playing field is very vast. But then when you get towards the negative extreme, it then starts falling and it becomes more objective because it's a function of health. Uh, so forth. Even intelligence is a function of health. Um, because if you're at a certain position and your health declines, it's not going to be expressed positively. If your health increases, and you're going to move in that direction. So really, it can be a function of the mind because if you are a defeatist, if you have a defeatist attitude, you're just going to reduce the probability of opportunity. So the probability, in my view, is transient. It exists within a range, but there's always a potential to leverage the probability if you add positive attributes and dampen it if you add negative attributes. But then again, the negative or positivity is dependent on the scenario. So the value is deviant and it switches between different domains and so forth. So it's interesting. I always find it interesting how we have a parabolic relationship, in any given, scenario, but it's not definitive either. And we can't really define it absolutely. So it becomes a relative construct. And um, that's why whenever you make a generalization, it's always going to be a lot of times like you could view, okay, society is tending in this direction, but that is due to like social conditioning and many factors. So when you localize a scale, what you notice is you get more. This pattern becomes eminent, but as you shift different, if you shift direction and it becomes more divergent, and the environment becomes more divergent, the relationship starts failing. It starts shifting. The trajectory becomes weaker and not so. Yes, these relationships do exist due to I would think of it's like I think of it like a force. We're pulled in a certain direction. Like technology pulls us. It facilitates the addiction process. It makes the probability. It increases the likelihood of addiction. Increases the likelihood of engaging in pornography or all the negative behaviors that we are accustomed to. There's also positive feedback, but a lot of these changes are due to the environment. And, because I like to think of it, we are essentially permutations of ideas and combinations. Our genetics and our basically whatever resides within the construct of our subconscious and even the mind. The reason why a lot of people now associate even though I'm not going to mention how it doesn't matter your belief, but there's a lot of atheists, it's starting to increase, is because we exist within a material world. There is a metaphysical domain, but the metaphysical domain is not, a lot of these conjectures or conjectures are not provable. they're beyond our range of comprehension or beyond our range of perception. We are confined and constrained within a boundary of existence. We can't go outside our range of perception. We are held within it, and therefore our reality is a function of that limit from the absolute minimum to the absolute maximum. And so all these ideas that we construct is manipulated in such a way based on the perceiver from what we, you know, can define. We are perceiving this, but we don't understand the perceiver. We just reside within the the intermediate zone of existence. And that's what gives us our superficial nature. We can't deny that. It would be hypocritical, to think that we are beyond that somehow. So yeah, it's just I've just been thinking about this relationship. um, but the best thing to do is be as optimistic as possible, because opportunities can always be within grasp. But the opportunities exist, uh, or are captivated. You captivate on those opportunities if you can see them, or if you can believe that they may exist on the horizon. And if you don't, then life collapses. It basically becomes closed in, and you do not. Basically, it's the negativity starts closing in, and the positivity gets eradicated. So it's always best to be an optimist, but negativity is inevitable. I think life throws, we all these negative scenarios get thrown at us so we can resist it and build resistance and utilize that to thrust in the positive direction as a lesson. And if the lesson is not taken, and we go through the vicious cycle of negativity, it could destroy one's soul, and it could literally uh, suck out the life, of our reward system, to where it's become completely dulled and it lacks any substance. So yeah, life is very transient. I mean, I think anyone could be on this anywhere along these spectrums, depending on the scenario. But because life is not fair, the position is skewed in such a direction due to many factors, including health, initial position, uh, socioeconomic status, partly luck, but in actuality, luck is dependent on movement. Essentially, luck, in my view, is when there is a position in space and time where the probability of, how would I put this? Uh, okay, the probability or likelihood of the occurrence, or uh, the success is very low, because it's an instantaneous. Like, think of the lottery. It's you have to be there at the right place and time. It's very instantaneous. So, but the thing is this is dependent on extroversion and movement. If you never move, then therefore you never get the opportunity to be in that position in space and time. If you're at a different position relative to that position, then it's never going to happen. So luck is a function of movement. Now, that's so therefore that's why extroverts tend to have more opportunities, because they go out of their niche, because opportunities could exist at positions way outside the bounds of your reality, but you're never going to get there, unfortunately, because you never traveled to that location. But if you do expand your region, you can enhance the range of opportunity. And then confidence is really uh, due to the reciprocation of movement and progression, how it or actually the positive feedback loop due to that progression and movement, which is different depending on the ingredients from within. That's why happiness is a function of what resides within. You have to change the internal in order to reinforce the external feedback in such a way to create some positive feedback loop to therefore reinforce confidence. but it is predicated on movement. So yes, that's why um, it is always best to not complain or blame or you know how would I put it? Just to be a defeatist or be nihilistic in view, because we already know the premise: life is not fair, and we know due to the yin yang, there could exist a position in time where you are within a negative region, like where the energy is more negative. And that is, again, a function of health and many factors. But because of that, it was inevitable. You couldn't control the scenario, it just happened. Therefore, there's no point, really, uh, how would I put it? There's no point ruminating over it for too long because that's only going to reinforce your reality, and the reality again is based on the expression. And I've realized this myself, being potentially on the autistic spectrum, is that people who are on the spectrum do not reciprocate emotions very well, so therefore they don't validate the observer based on the expectation. Because the thing is there does not exist a norm. Normality does not exist. It's subjective. It changes within individual will define it differently. But there is a neutral axis or a norm where the distribution of energy, where people are conditioned to fit within that region to a higher with a higher probability, um, based on locality. Now, if you deviate from that and become an outlier, it could go in a positive or a negative direction. Therefore, if you go in the negative direction, which is like if you don't reciprocate the emotions in a positive manner, you're in a negative direction. Of course, what's going to happen is you're not going to get the outcome is not going to be favorable. So it's based on the cards that are played. So, the expectation in return, there should be the expectation that maybe it should be dampened because the behavior was dampened, or and it depends on the expectation, the position of expectation, or where the position is relative to what occurred. So that's just reality. I mean, it can't control uh, basically how receptive others are to your behavior if you are not aware yourself of the your behavior. Because you know I've known this myself, as I can make weird faces, or weird expressions, and even though I don't mean it, it gets taken a different way, or maybe the wrong way. That was inevitable at that time. You know, it's you can't we can't control how the perceiver views, how they view uh, us, because our whatever assumptions are made is a function of how we're expressing our energy. That's why law of attraction has a usually a huge bearing on the probability or opportunities that exist. But that depends on many factors, and so forth. Um, and yeah, I just think that this obviously is more complicated than what I have presented, way more complicated. But I think in life in general, the best thing in order to make to optimize life in general, it's about simplification. Um, Simplification just keeps keeps our keeps allows us to maintain stability, because as we add complexity, it can super saturate the system, or it could cause the system to become overstimulated or bombarded, and therefore it could create a negative feedback loop, and dampen our system to such a degree, depending on how much uh, how much we have adapted to the change. So we're always adapting. So therefore, it is important um, to move in such a move in the rate of progression should be reasonable, and that is why stress is the biggest factor in the aging process. If you add too many variables, you induce stress depending on the distance, or how I like to think of it this way: you adapt to a number of variables per event frame, and if the number of variables per event it deviates from your typical or that range of adaptation, then you're going to create stress. The stress is going to reach some limit where it becomes exponentially large, and that is a problem. So the best thing is what we're doing was continuously simplifying life, and that is the mode of progression. So that's just my synopsis. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.